Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Hello, this is Jamie Sepino from LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. Jerry and I are here with some folks from the higher ed environment, and we're really excited to talk about the struggles and the challenges with, attracting students for the colleges and then also retaining them. So we're going to have conversations around this topic. And you may see a familiar face. Our very first podcast that we ever had, our maiden voyage was with Michael Salvatore, and he was then the superintendent in New Jersey. In a K-12 environment, but now he is at the higher ed level. So we're excited to have you back, Michael. Very excited about that. And we'll let you introduce your new role in just a minute. But Jerry, our other guest, you met at an event, didn't you?
I did. I first met Cameron McCoy when I was hearing him speaking at an event about higher education and how they are responding today to today's students and really moving away from that industrial ed model that maybe you and I were involved with, Jamie. And I was really amazed at the things that our higher ed colleagues are doing to help students to be successful where they are. And I loved the way they are focusing on the student and really making sure that they can be successful. Especially, we're hearing a lot about those first generation students that no one else in their family has been to college. And it's so hard to maneuver that situation if you have not had someone be in the college situation before. So once I heard Cameron speak, I think I ran up to him and said, can we get you on our podcast? Because he had so many good ideas to share, really opened my eyes as to what is happening in higher education. So we're excited to have both of our guests here. And Cameron, can I start with you and have you just quickly introduce yourself, tell us where you are and your role, and then we'll go to Michael next.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you both for having us here. It's quite an honor, and I'm thankful to be here with Michael, a very well-known and talented leader serving New Jersey. So I happen to be in Winchester, Virginia today, in my fifth day on the job at Shenandiah University as their new provost. So it's a really exciting time to be at Shenandiah. I think it's a place that is already launching and is ready to really redefine what private higher education looks like. So excited to be here and blessed to talk with you all today.
Thank you, Cameron. We're excited to have you. Michael?
Great, wonderful. So happy to be back with you all. It seems like we just recorded the first episode not too long ago, and here we are. What number would this be?
We're getting on to 50. We're close to 50.
Wow.
Yes.
So I love doing this because it's an opportunity for me to listen to other people, to steal some great ideas. And I know Cameron has some awesome ideas and a wonderful perspective to take some tips from. So excited to be here with you today and looking forward to continuing the conversation about what's happening in higher education and more specifically, how K-12 can help be a real partner in that process to make sure we have everybody prepared for what's expected.
Yeah. Let's start with that, Michael, because of the fact that you've been in K-12, you're now in higher ed, since this, in this past year, you're both new to your roles, actually, right? But what are those conversations that need to be had between K-12 and higher ed to move forward?
Well, the easy one is kind of start with what conversations not to have. And it starts like what I observed in K-12 space was, so and this is typical, the elementary teachers often said, well, they're not prepared. It's the preschool teachers, right? Oh, yeah. Right. And the middle school teachers said, the elementary teachers, what do they do down there? Uh-huh. And then the high school teachers blamed the middle school. And then college typically will be like, they're not prepared. High school did not prepare them. So that's not a good conversation because And then it also impacts the market. The industry says, we're getting graduates that are not prepared with the skill set we need. So instead of playing that game where we keep pointing a finger backwards, it's really about communication. Because what I've learned from the K-12 space is when you begin to create these horizontal and vertical articulation meetings or opportunities, it enhances the conversation and it allows people to have a better understanding of the experience that one person's going through. So when you're talking about the difference between a child who's a first generation student going to college, there is a difference there. And instead of saying they're not prepared, we say, how do we better prepare them? Right. So if students are coming in lacking a particular skill set, well, how do we compound our lesson planning and our structure to make sure we prepare them? And I'm sure we're going to get into the idea of student success and retention when we talk about graduation and so forth. But that's the tip, is just making sure we're communicating in a healthy environment and not in one that criticizes or speaks down to or is condescending of the previous experience.
Yeah, remove that finger pointing for sure. That we're familiar with, because that's easy to do, right? I think the conversation that you're talking about is harder to do, but there's a reason for that. It's going to progress us in a much better way, and usually there is a lot of work involved in that type of conversation to really propel us much better. Yeah, for sure.
I know you're all from New Jersey, but in Kansas, we've really been working on this in the past few years, talking about post-secondary success rate, looking at students 5 years out to see, are they, and it's not just college, right? It can be, did they get a certification? Are they still working towards something? But really making sure that the student is successful for life, which is, I think, the direction we should all be going. And what can we do to get kids there? And Cameron, when I first heard you speak, you were discussing how colleges are really flexing and changing in order to help meet the needs of students and moving away from that industrial ed model. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what you see happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love Michael's points here, that this is often about who's prepared and who's not prepared, and how we communicate with each other. And if you think about it, I mean, he just described in the K through 12 sector sort of our industrial process. You go,
Right.
here to here to here to here to here, and there are these sort of stage gates that are there. And then you get to a place where you've got a rising senior who's trying to figure out how to go to college. And frankly, we've made that communication incredibly challenging. Even for those who are highly privileged, it's quite a confusing process to figure out which college should I go to, how should I go there, and we as institutions are given credit for accepting the most prepared learners. That's where quality seems to be, and to me, that is fundamentally backwards, right? There's no proof that somebody who got into one of the more prestigious institutions or more highly ranked institutions traveled a further distance than somebody who went to a less prestigious or broadly accessible institution. And I think fundamentally part of this is that we approach higher education in what I call an industrial process approach, right? So if you think about that, that's just ripe with barriers at the entry stage. Mm-hmm. What are all those stage gates that we put in place? And then once we've allowed you into our institution and you climb over our ivy covered walls and you're inside of the institution, we recognize learning in our process that we call matriculation, which by and large is very left to right and quite linear and is aligned to some predefined major. And when we do that, we ignore all of the learning that we have provided for young people or those who are coming at a later stage in life to shape themselves as humans. So what is happening in the residential learning environment? What might be happening in the experiential space? And so we're focused in that portion of our process really only on the academic enterprise, which is certainly incredibly important, but it presents a number of barriers in modern higher education. And then once you move out of the matriculation process, you've completed a number of credit hours, you speak with an employer about what your major is, and you launch into some pathway that you probably only stay in, data wise, for a very short period of time, averaging 2 to 5 years until you change into another profession. But our process at that point is to ask you for money, right? So if I think about our industrial process, it's barriers to admission, matriculation, ask me for money. And we live in a platform environment. And so all these businesses are sort of making this transition and have been making this transition to platform. And in order for us in higher education to transition as well, we really have to do what I would say are 3 things. First, we have to focus on the intent to learn, build towards anchoring, and then focus on this sort of career success, lifelong career success you're pointing to. And there's a bunch of pieces and parts to that. But if we don't focus our core on centering learners in this process and making it easier for them to use us as a platform for their lifelong success, and centering trust. I mean, you think the data are somewhere around 80% of people are lying on their LinkedIn profile, and we haven't even activated our credentials. I mean, your diploma it's not on the wall behind you. It's probably in a box somewhere, right? We have to activate that. And frankly, probably most importantly, we have to start to center equity with intention. And those barriers have to be moved out of the way with an equity first focus. So that's a long way to get around it here, but I really see a shift of institutions away from this sort of process oriented into a much more platform oriented tool or approach that gives agency over learning credentials, recognizes learning when it occurs, and engages learners at a point of their intention to learn in a way that is modernized and platform oriented.
So Cameron, a platform environment may be a new term to people that are listening. Can you give us just a broad definition of what you mean when you say a platform environment?
I can. I mean, let's go back to the point here where we're centering learners, or think about the way that we engage with businesses, the way that we engage with media, the way that we engage with really the world around us. We do that not necessarily on a subscription model, but we go and pick the things and pieces and parts that we want when we need them. In higher education, isn't quite there yet, and maybe we won't ever be there. But if we're to think about us as a platform, that means that we are enabling and empowering learners to engage with us when they need to engage with us, and that we're being proactive in that engagement with them, because what we've done is we've anchored them to us for all of their learning needs throughout the course of their life. And so if you think about that sort of in that core matriculation, which I like to call the anchoring period, that means that in the academic enterprise, we're focusing on curated credential-rich pathways. So that if a learner stops out or drops out, they still have agency over their credentials. Perhaps it's anchored to an immutable ledger of some sort, thinking sort of blockchain here, where it's a digital wallet and they can stack and organize their credentials and competencies accordingly to share with potential employers or those that need them, other institutions. But that in that same regard, we're recognizing learning as it occurs with the human skills in the residential experience, and certainly in those experiential opportunities as well. I mean, the number of internships and co-ops and engagements we have with outside enterprises that don't come with anything other than a resume line seems to be a bit of a problem for me. I mean, why wouldn't we say, let's imagine Michael and I go work with you guys and we're doing an internship and he does an incredibly cool project and he has that sort of moment of distinction and I file some papers. Yes. Today, we both get to say that we did an internship with you. And there's really no distinction between those. And we also didn't say to you as institutions that Cameron needs to develop in this set of human skills and this set of technical skills, and Michael needs to develop in this set and this set, and ask you then to affirm that that is the educational experience we had. And then we then could turn around and say, this is true, it's verifiable and validatable. And Cameron and Michael, you can share that moment of distinction at your will.
So it sounds like we're talking about a personalized, authentic learning situation, like would be in, like we hope to be, right, in the K-12 environment. So instead of moving to the traditional model that we all know for higher ed, make it more personalized to the specific needs of the learner, and put them in charge of their learning. I guess that's really what you're describing, right?
Yeah, in many ways. I mean, I don't want us to think about the learning experience only being that 4 years. I mean,
Right.
and I'm using the word learner intentionally here because we've defined college and the college experience around an 18 to 22-year-old. And while that is really important, and we have a lot of next gen learners who are ready to engage in that way, us as the U.S. as an economy, to sort of maintain GDP right where it is at 2.6 to 2.9%, we probably have to double the number of bachelor's degrees that we're issuing in the next 10 years or so. And that means we either have to scale our enterprise with the number of institutions we have today, or we have to double the number of institutions. And that's just not a reality, right? So that means, I think, Jamie, that we maybe have to start thinking about offering learning opportunities in ways that we aren't, but really intentionally curating those experiences so there's not a lot of stop out, drop out, or loss in the process, and that we can continually engage. And when your post degree, if you've finished your 120 some odd hours or you've produced another one, that we're much more proactive in engaging you when you're ready to make some sort of a transition. And so we don't necessarily know that today, and in part because we don't ask that question. But I should know that you're leveraging and activating your transcript or some of the portions of courses that you took or your diploma, or that you're seeking a job, because those data are there. And it should be a trigger for me to say, hey, Jamie, I hope you had a wonderful experience here at Shenandoah, and I'm ready to help you make that next transition. How might we serve you? And we talk about those kinds of interaction today as if those are distinctly different from the way that we do education in higher education currently. And I don't think that they are. It's just a matter of us reimagining how and when we engage with you and how we make that an opportunity. And to be honest with you, we have a lot of learning in the 4-year sector that we could do from the 2-year sector. They're quite good at this kind of engagement because people know I can just go to my local 2-year institution and engage with them when I need to. And so we could take some of that idea, but we also have to leverage modern technology infrastructure to allow us to empower and engage and certainly center equity and trust.
I'm wondering, has COVID shaped any of your ideas about how we might do this going forward? Has it had an impact at all?
I love what you were saying, Cameron, because the idea that we're kind of modeling after these unique boutique programs that happen in higher ed, right? There are these interesting programs that bring industry into the classroom. There's this communication, this collaboration that prepares students differently, but it's at a small scale, Jerry. It's like it's not widespread, and we all have this unique center of distinction or program of distinction that we take great pride in, but it's not universal. And when we're talking about this transition from K-12 to higher ed, so that'll keep some students prepared and keep them engaged and make sure they're prepared. That'll keep some, but the boatloads of students, the rafts that come through for a year or two and leave, a lot are about engagement, but it's also about that exposure and the interventions. You see, pre-K to 12 space is. We understand that we don't have the luxury to select incoming, right? We are the model for access and equitable education, but the intervention piece in K-12 or pre-K-12 is heavy, right? You have so many resources dedicated to making sure students are successful. Whereas what I'm seeing at higher ed, and this is specific to Kean, but in some other institutions, is that there are interventions around student success and retention, but they don't really resemble what the intervention and the passion of the intervention that exists in a K-12 space. And I think the best side to make it analogous to is a student who has special needs. We get it in every atmosphere. We get it in pre-K, we get it all the way through higher ed. But if you take away that, you strip that classification away, there are students who are not classified as anything particular, but they have great needs, and there are interventions and supports that need to be in place to ensure their success. And this is what higher ed typically has a tough time doing. You referenced a 40% four-year cohort graduation rate, or nationally, or 50%. In K-12, people would be fired for that, right? It's like you cannot do that. But also, we know it's the orientation process to make sure everything's the right fit, and making sure that we know when students come in undecided, right, Cameron? They have a higher likelihood of not completing. So it's all about preparing them for what their career could be, or their first career could be, right, Cameron? To your point, a lot of data out there suggests that, a lot of data and studies reveal that students who come in undecided or not sure will enter into college, drop out, enter in a career they don't like, change careers. But even with a bachelor's degree, you're bound to change your career. I think they're talking about millennials and the new generation in terms of changing their career up to 7 times in the first 15 years or something insane, right? Where my previous post was 23 years in the same institution, right? It's just a different generation. So I think the conversations around making sure, I think it's hard to have a conversation about equity and access, though, for higher ed when they are very selective, right? And maybe rightfully so, because why we don't want to waste a student's money or time when they might not see themselves in a particular program, but we're squeezing them into a program. What Cameron is suggesting is creating opportunities for students to engage with professionals and learn maybe differently than the structure that currently exists. So you have this structure that exists that might meet the needs of that 40% or 50%. But what about the other 50%? What if we were unique and personalized that process? And I love the connection to community college. I met yesterday with the president of Brookdale Community College, and he constantly, maybe it's who he is, but he constantly was thinking of new ideas to engage his partnerships with his high school partnerships. And having just unique ideas, because he needs to survive. His enrollment is his survival. So he has to be creative, think outside the box. And a lot of what you're saying about micro-credentials and personalized pathway is something we discussed yesterday. So I think the higher ed through COVID has really analyzed how we're doing, how we're structured, and some new innovative ways to capture a broader audience.
Yes, and I always think that moving straight into college when you don't know what you want to do is a very expensive way to look at options. And do you see more kids taking a gap year and not going straight into college, or is that changed?
Yeah, that kind of speaks to what Cameron was talking about too, perhaps, with not necessarily doing something in 4 years, between that 18 to 22 range, right?
I think this year our data will be really interesting with COVID because like an example would be New Jersey state colleges. They're kind of in lockstep about vaccines, right? And it's different according to each state. I don't know what West Virginia or Virginia or Georgia or Mississippi, I don't know what they're doing, right? But they're not in unison. And when you have vaccine as a mandate, that weighs on your decision on particularly an 18-year-old who's been in a remote environment for a year and a half, right? They may not be, if they have an opportunity to pause, they may. And I think we're probably going to see some things for 2021, for 21-22 entry that we hopefully don't see again. But I do think that if you're ever going to see a gap, it's probably going to be this year, because there's a lot to figure out, and there's a lot of misinformation and new information out there that people are contemplating before they go back to school.
Yes. Are you doing anything intentionally to really help that first generation college student be successful? What are some things that colleges are doing to really support them?
You're headed towards something really important here, and that is that we all, and it's just our nature here, talk about higher education, and probably the P12 sector as well. The way that we deliver that is wholly centered around a white male process.
Right.
And I think we've got some work to do to reshape and refocus and frankly become quite intentionally anti-racist, but at the same time also focus on equity first and providing that agency. And COVID, if it did anything, was show us a lot of the inequities that are out there, particularly for first gen, next gen learners, and those who are learners of color and learners from rural areas. Have found themselves quite excluded and challenged in the way that they receive education. But for me, it also offers us some opportunity to think about learning where and when it occurs. So this idea of a gap year, I mean, there's some really great organizations out there figuring out how someone who applies to Shenandoah, perhaps they've been accepted, but it might make sense for us to say, listen, I want you to go study for the next 6 months or next year in Costa Rica with this organization, this not-for-profit organization. And when you come back, you'll be a sophomore. But you're going to be admitted there first and you'll transfer into us. That kind of a thing opens some eyes in a totally different way. But so does recognizing that when a young person, if we're only talking about the 18 to 22-year-old, comes here, for their first time, we're still focused heavily on that academic progression. And that's where all the metrics are, right? But there's learning that occurs outside of the classroom. It's that first time that they've been away from home. They're having to do their own laundry. They're having to schedule themselves. And for a lot of these folks, now I give our learners of color a lot of credit. For many of them, particularly first gen, they're much more organized. And so it behooves us to really understand how to create an environment where imposter syndrome is not something they face every single day, where they feel like this really is home, and we've given them the support structure and empowered them with their learning credentials, whether it's residential, experiential, or academic, in a way that helps them understand where they might go next and helps us curate them. But there's also a technology piece to this, Jerry, that many of us are sort of afraid to think about because it feels additive. But I think we've got to find the courage here to both think about what does a lifelong pathway look like. So, for example, someone might come here and say, I want to study accounting. And if we're not looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data that say accountants won't exist in that same form in 10 years, maybe you should think about fintech. We've missed the opportunity, right? We didn't set them up for success. And there are some organizations and technologies that can help us do that kind of thing. And at the same time, we have to think about what does this mean from a digital delivery standpoint? We're so many of us are stuck on our campus, and that classroom education must be delivered in the classroom. We've made a pendulum back the other way that we probably have to sort of right size and really embrace the idea of integrated digital opportunities in a flexible environment. And being able to engage with the learner when they need to engage in a way that allows our faculty to still meaningfully deliver educational experiences, but also meets our learners where they are. And frankly, if we can get all that right, then we can think about the campus as a platform. I mean, there's no reason that you couldn't, if COVID proved anything else, it's no reason you couldn't live in our dorms, work for you guys, and take classes at the same time. I mean, that's a platform.
Right.
You don't have to live in New York City. You could live here.
Right.
And work for a company there. So I think there's lots of options and lots of opportunity coming out of this if we resist the urge to go back to what was.
So I want to just jump into something that you said, Cameron, and you spoke about imposter syndrome, which this audience might not be familiar with. But so I was a first generation college student myself. And I often sat in that classroom saying, am I supposed to be here? Do I pretend like I'm like them? Trying to find my identity. And eventually you find your way, but it's really through the outside the classroom where you find that you belong there. And that the whole concept, this division of student affairs, I think it's critical for not just for retention, but a truly successful college experience. It's to be engaged. And we see it from pre-K to 12, those who are engaged in activities in school, whether it be athletics, whether it be clubs, the band. And Jamie, you know this, right? As having two daughters who are athletes and very engaged, right? Their experience is well-rounded because of those things outside of the classroom. The classroom has to be rich and rewarding, but outside is where we connect. And for me, it was being involved in things outside the classroom where I found my identity. And we have to continue to do this. The students that are most engaged in colleges, no surprise, are those with GPAs over 3.2. No surprise. It's actually probably parallel in secondary ed right now. And we have to think about creative ways to engage those students who are not self-motivators or curious by nature to go and find something for them. So those typical meetings with the tables in the quad, that's not going to attract everybody to go and say, I want to be in the choir. It's got to be more than that. And I think Derek Bach, former Harvard president years ago, said it best, that those who are engaged, particularly with people and school officials, have a more likelihood of having success and graduating college than those who don't. So I even see it as my responsibility as a college administrator to make sure I'm connecting with all of our students. So in saying hi, that pleasant smile, that welcoming voice, and not because that one person makes a difference, but it's a model for other faculty and staff who walk by people each day. It's that let's stay connected, because those little pragmatics are really important, and I think that's gonna make a big difference moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's you're hitting the nail on the head from a centering trust kind of standpoint, right? It's not just trust in the verification value of the credential, but it's trust in the environment, right? Because if we're being honest with ourselves, learners like Michael, when they come to campus, they're playing a different game than folks who came from privilege like myself. I mean, I never doubted I was going to go to college, and I was totally comfortable just kind of being there and doing whatever I needed to do. And I had no real worries. And a lot of our first gen learners are playing a game in the classroom and really deeply focused on that, because that's what they've been told is the key to success. I think we've really got to create that trusted environment that engages them in the way that Michael's talking about, because it's really important for us to create that mentality of service. And I'll tell you, one of the key elements of me wanting to come to Shenandoah, when I first came onto campus, I was blessed to spend time with a number of different learners here, young folks. And they gave me a tour and asked every single one of them, what is it you want to do with your life? And I'm not making this up. 5 out of 5 separately all said to me, I want to help other people. Right?
Love that. Yeah.
Right. And there's something in the water and something in the culture here. And I can tell you, it certainly is the leadership, absolutely is the way that our faculty serve here. But, the question becomes, well, how do we make sure that that's real always in perpetuity? And how do we create that sort of Shenandoah experience, regardless of where your pillow lies and regardless of where you are in your life cycle? And I think that's really important to do that and build that level of trust.
Absolutely.
I think there's that old quote or something. If you really want to seek happiness, the trick is to lose yourself into the service of other people, right? Yeah. To really just be connected and committed to serving other people. So yeah. That's a great story.
That is. And, learning is so social. And I know when my two children went to college, and it was like, you have to be connected to somebody in the college situation, because it can be the loneliest place in the world. Mm-hmm. And so my son, I just said, you will join a fraternity. And he was like, no way. Now he is connected with those people still today. And it was a great situation for him. He was kind of shy, and I knew that he needed that connection. So the connection can be so different for everyone, but it's also people like yourself that are reaching out to the kids. We had a man at Kansas State University that everybody knew because he was so friendly. And oh my gosh, I just realized he was from New Jersey. But Pat Bosco, and everyone knew Pat Bosco. I could call him as a parent, the kids would call him, and he made the difference for that huge university. So it does make that difference. It must be a Jersey thing, huh?
Maybe it is. Well, but I think what you're saying, what you're both saying sounds so simple to make, have college as a nurturing environment that is customized to their needs and where they want to go, but also, provide that important engagement. But it sounds so simple, but it doesn't always happen. And why? I mean, it does seem like a simple concept. So why doesn't it always happen? I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking lots of hand-holding, supports, advisors. I was just talking to a friend whose school has for each student, 3 different advisors. And that could seem like overload, but hey, that could make the difference of a student saying, I feel connected and worthy and I belong here and I want to move on to what the heck, I can just move on. So how do you make that shift? How does that happen?
Yeah. Well, I obviously have some thoughts here, but you're right. It's easier said than done. Absolutely. If it were as simple as I certainly might be making it sound, it would be done by now. And you can point to a number of institutions that have made this shift, but it's really important to recognize all of the external pressures that are on us as institutions. And quite frankly, some of those things we've brought upon ourselves, and we've lost our voice in the public square in many ways. But part of it is we practice isomorphic behavior. We copy each other in our organizational structures, and we do that because we're incented to do so, whether it's on the outcome measurement side or our faculty pathways and the way that we create growth there, our development of majors and our analysis of where the opportunities are, or even in the quote unquote rankings and assessments of quality that happen on the front end of this, and how we even recruit leaders. All of those things sort of push us to look the same. And that causes a lot of real challenges in the way that we design for success. And to be honest with you, the kinds of things that you just suggested should look different at Shenandoah than they might at Kean. And that's okay. And we should be okay with that. But we're not incented to behave that way. And I think that's a really important point here, that the structural systems and organizational behaviors are really sort of designed against the simple solutions, and many of the fiscal constraints too.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah, because it sounds like added staff for a lot of these, not just having that counselor, but having enough to have touch points on kids on a regular basis, right? Yeah, so sure. It takes money. And I guess that's the big challenge.
Well, it takes money and technology too.
You're right about that. But so I think to make it a little broader in terms of the answer, not that that's helpful, but I'm coming off a Cal Newport book of deep work, and I can't help but think of what he talks about. So all of us, our human nature is that we know it's really important to get involved in meaningful work, yet we're in the shallows quite often, just pushing email, pushing paper, and doing things. And not to be an excuse, but this is human nature. We occupy ourselves with 160 email and getting back within 24 hours. And then we realize we've spent 90 minutes doing some really shallow push paper work, when that 90 minutes is the kind of that key marker to really engage yourself in something meaningful. So it's not just a university saying, how do we plan and engage and why they're not doing it. I think it's all of us saying, how do we reframe the current work we do each day so that we're not in the shallow work of pushing things forward and getting stuff done and checking boxes, and scheduling those opportunities for ourselves to deeply think about what matters and what's important. So if universities do that, it's to think about how do we stay engaged with our students. If K-12 does it, it's saying how do we personalize that experience, But I think if we all kind of have to take a note from Cal Newport and his his writings, because he's right. The more time we spend on meaningful work, the more fulfilled we feel, and the more impact it has on society.
Yeah,
I think that goes back to what Cameron said too, where you asked that question and they all answered that they want to be helping others. So it's being authentic and being connected to others. Michael, you said that, instead of sticking with the shallow, pushing papers, checking boxes, right? We want to make it authentic and meaningful. And I know my daughter, who's currently, she's a rising sophomore in college. She had every freshman has to have a civic course, a community course, how to connect with the community, be involved in, pick an organization to work with and help. And actually COVID kind of squashed a little bit of what they typically do. But I loved that. I mean, of course, they did that in high school. It's part of what we do in high school. So just as you mentioned, Cameron, bringing some of what we do in high school into the college, why stop that, right? Mm-hmm. Bringing it forward into that, the higher ed arena, because that's who they should be as citizens, right? As real people in the real world. That's what makes them connected and have a purpose in their lives.
That's right. Yeah. If I could reach the screen and give Michael a high five on that meaningful work, I would totally do it. And Jamie, I think you're exactly right. I mean, we in fairness, we in higher education haven't been asked to deliver the human skills, so to speak, with an intention and framework until after roughly 2008, when the downturn in the economy and businesses stopped making that investment, right? And all of a sudden it became our responsibility. But even then, we haven't necessarily been really intentional about that, to say these are the human skills that someone who came to our institution will graduate with. But to bring kind of all that together, and Michael's really profound point of meaningful work, one of the mechanisms that I think we all have to think about in terms of how we make these kinds of transitions is to build the proverbial mental muscle around how we think about what we do and when we do it. So in that regard, those that have made big transitions, and many of us dismiss them, but they're largely successful. Whether they're University Innovation Alliance folks or they're the Southern New Hampshires of the world, who a lot of us would just, well, it's just a big, massive online. Kind of, yeah, but they didn't get there without this sort of core infrastructure of place, space, and mental ability to think through some of these really meaty challenges that seem simple but are not, right? So when Michael was talking, I kept thinking about Clay Christenson's Jobs to be Done framework, which is a tool that simply says, what is being expected of us from learners? What might be expected of us from alumni, from employers, from our faculty, from our staff? And how are we meeting them and those needs? And what is it? And then after we've understood that, what is it we're doing now that isn't meeting those needs, that is meeting those needs that we deem to be necessary, that we might be able to do in a different way? And that, frankly, the third piece of that is, what is it that we should be doing that is meaningful to us, where we're doing that meaningful work? We're not just sitting around answering emails for 8 hours a day because someone said we needed to be in the office from 8 to 5, right? And that's a heavy lift exercise that higher ed institutions really have to invest in across the board, whether it's in career centers or schools of business or in the faculty or anywhere else in our mechanism. Really thinking about getting to that place where we're stopping doing things we just do because we've always done them or because other institutions do them, doing things intentionally at scale that we should be using technology or should be doing a different way, and then really focusing on those meaningful, impactful elements of deep work.
Isn't that what I think Google did that, right? So they gave everybody that 20% time where there's like, hey, pick a problem that we have here at Google and you can focus on it, one that you're passionate about, you want to change. And that's how every feature for Gmail came about. Numerous solutions were presented that way. Now, is it reasonable to say every Friday we can pack it in for 8 hours and just focus on deep work? Probably not. But I think it's reasonable to say we can push our email to a 90-minute window a day. And forget that little surge you get when you have like 5 minutes of downtime and you think, I need to check my email. we need the silence in our life too. We need the separation. We need to disconnect. We often invite distractions into our place because that's what we do. We're like, all right, I got 5 minutes. I mean, go look at anybody waiting on a line to go into a store, a restaurant, DMV. They're on their phone, inviting distractions in when they probably can be, right, Cameron, where they probably can be really focused on a deep problem that they have. And by the time they got to the end of that 90-minute DMV line, they might even have a solution. But instead, we all as humans invite many distractions in. And I think we have to learn to filter that. I mean, just go ask a teen to show you their profile, right? That app that tells you how many minutes you're on social media, and then just have them consider for a second that they wasted 2 hours today.
Yeah.
That's that. I think that's where we find the time to do the deep work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think about back to that COVID question in that same regard, Michael. I mean, you're really kind of hitting it on the head here. How many organizations? I saw a really great article the other day on this, by the way. I think I forwarded it on my LinkedIn profile, but someone was sort of tongue in cheek talking about remote work and how organizations are talking about remote work and the necessity for us to actively manage our time and share how we're using our time and to define outcomes from the work that we're doing, which I find to be fascinating, that it takes someone not being in the office for us to define what work they ought to be doing. What were we doing before? We're just because you come in the office, that guarantees that you're productive with your time? I don't think so.
Right.
I mean, that's on
Absolutely.
us. We have to be better about that.
Absolutely. Yes. Wow. So many good ideas came out of this. And I noted both of the books that you mentioned, the Cal Newport and the Clay Christenson. Is there, as we kind of land this plane today, is there anything that you're doing this summer just for your own personal development or learning for your job next year that you could share with our listeners that maybe they would like to connect with? A book, a YouTube, a Netflix, it could be anything.
Toes in the sand?
Yes.
Toes in the sand. So new to me, I've never had this in my life before, but Kean University has an energy shutdown on Fridays where they condense and they do 4 to 8 work weeks. I've never had it before in my life. But on that Friday, I've been to the beach almost every Friday, whether I've been surfing, enjoying time in the sand. And I'm trying to take advantage of another book I read, and I forget the author, but it's about having mini habits, right? The idea, it's a great
MINI, mini?
Mini habits. Yeah, mini, like really small habits, right?
Yes.
But the idea is that we all believe we can do one push-up, right? So we're motivated to do one push-up, but maybe you could do 2, but you're not going to set a goal for 2. You're going to set a goal for 1 because it's easy.
So true. Yes.
So when you put those, you're more likely, I mean, there's lots of data that he reveals in the book that you're more likely to complete a micro habit and then build on that. So you're eventually, he built up to 100 push-ups every day from the one push-up model. So I've been trying to do that, just set small goals for myself to spend time outside, to reconnect, to read, and make them short, an extension of what I do right now. And then you kind of feel proud about yourself. And so
absolutely.
So engage in little mini habits and micro parties and whatever you can do to celebrate yourself.
I think that's great, Michael, because especially for you, because I don't know anyone else who is motor nonstop. So I'm really happy that you're able to find that time, and I'm sure your family is too. That's fantastic. Good stuff.
How about you, Cameron?
Well, I wish I could share that I was intentional about it as Michael. I mean, I've been just trying to figure out how do I transition into this new job, and
day 5, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a blessing, and I have to give Shenandiah credit and my predecessor credit. I mean, they have been open and transparent and engaged since day -75, and all the way through. So I don't feel like I walked into something that I didn't know what was going on, but it's been a real blessing to sort of have a little bit of time off and spend it with the family and embrace my introvert, because I think a lot of folks don't realize how hard COVID was for people who are extroverted, and certainly for people who are introverts. Just being able to refuel yourself, as Michael's talking about, is really important, and being mindful about it. So it's just been a blessing for me to work on some projects around the house and spend time with the family. And we are going to do a little camping in Oregon here in a couple of weeks. And
good.
And that's sort of my fuel. But I want to throw one more book at you that I kind of love. It's
Sure.
super easy read. We could talk about books all day long. I'll probably call Michael after this and we'll just share them back and forth. But I love this book because I read it several times a year just because it just sort of reminds me of people and how we engage with each other. It's called Predictably Irrational.
Oh.
And it's by Michael Ariely, or Dan Ariely, excuse me, Dan Ariely. And it is a really fascinating sort of social study in the decisions that we make and why we make them and the things that sort of influence us in the process. I use it all the time when I talk about higher education, but it is so eye-opening, and you reflect on yourself on, why did I do that? And you go, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's totally irrational, but predictably so. So it's a fun, quick read. But
we will look that up. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm so impressed with the work that higher ed is doing and the changes that you're making to make all students feel included and part of the process. So thank you both for being part of the show today. We do want to mention that we have started going on to Clubhouse like next Wednesday and inviting our guests onto Clubhouse so that other people can talk to you as well. So we'll be extending that opportunity to you. If you'd like to join us on Clubhouse next Wednesday night, we'll be talking about higher education, and hopefully you can join us and let other people ask you some questions as well. So what else do we need to add before we close, Jamie?
Well, the Clubhouse is every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. So join us like Jerry said, to continue the conversation, but interact. And we hope that both you, Cameron and Michael can join us. We'll talk about if you have Clubhouse accounts or not, even though we've been talking about disconnecting from social media, but it is a really interesting platform for this.
It could be a mini habit on Wednesdays, right?
But Jerry and I have organized, we've been reflecting, as Michael said, we've been doing this now, it's our almost 50 something podcasts. Right. And we were able to reflect and come up with themes that our podcasts exist around. And we've sorted those into choice boards. And so we are offering CEUs for any 3 podcasts that you listen to, and we have them organized by topics of SEL and collaboration and engagement. So we'll share those, and if you check out our platforms, you'll be able to check those out and find them. So please enjoy them. But again, thank you. I just was loving this conversation so much. The two of you just brought up so many different thoughts, connecting either to my college days or my experiences with my daughters who are now at that age. And, it's so interesting to hear what these new innovations that you all are realizing. And again, new, but really just bringing it down to the basics. And really, it's going to make the difference to attracting and keeping students so that they can set off and be successful in their lives. So your colleges are very lucky to have the two of you, and we're really lucky to have the two of you on this podcast. So thanks again so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you guys for having me, and Michael, I'll let you say your piece here. But I think it would be appropriate for us to thank all of those educators out there at the P through 20 level who made so many sacrifices over the past 15, 18 months here in service to our learners and our society. And so I would be remiss without thanking them. And thank you guys for sort of opening the door here on helping us innovate in the interest of equity.
Great, thank you. I certainly want to piggyback that, Cameron. Extend my appreciation, gratitude to the teachers out there who were superheroes this year, to the parents who became teachers by default, which was insane. But we're working through it, and certainly higher ed, who is finding a new way to do business and being creative in doing so. So thank you. I look forward to listening to some more of your podcasts. You two are doing a great job. And I think the the big reveal is the impact that this has upon education as a whole, right? If somebody can change your way of thinking or doing something, then you know you've had an impact. So I love the work you're doing, and I look forward to joining you in the future.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.